put your phone or device aside and immerse yourself in this audio story. Perfect for listening on the move, while relaxing, or for bedtime listening. We release new stories daily, so make sure to like and subscribe to not miss out. This story is based on true events. The man behind Lehman's collapse. In the final hours before the collapse, Richard Fuld stood alone in his corner office on the 31st floor, watching the city lights flicker below like dying embers. Outside, the world was about to witness the largest bankruptcy in American history. But inside that glass tower, one man still believed he could stop it. They called him the Gorilla of Wall Street, a man so feared, so ruthless, that even his own executives whispered his name with caution. What they didn't know was that for 15 years, Fuld had been building something far more dangerous than a bank. He'd been constructing a financial weapon aimed directly at the heart of the global economy. And when it detonated on September 15th, 2008, the shockwave would destroy millions of lives, evaporate trillions in wealth, and nearly bring civilization itself to its knees. This is the story of the man who refused to blink, the empire he built on shadows, and the dark secret that turned American capitalism into a game of Russian roulette. Richard Severin Fuld Jr. was born into comfortable privilege in 1946, the son of a successful New York businessman. But comfort was never enough. From his earliest days, those who knew him described a young man consumed by an almost pathological need to dominate, to win, to crush anyone who stood in his way. He attended the University of Colorado, then earned his MBA from NYU's Stern School of Business in 1973, entering Wall Street at precisely the moment when financial markets were transforming from gentlemen's clubs into gladiatorial arenas. In 1969, he joined Lehman Brothers as a commercial paper trader, starting at the bottom of an institution that had survived the Civil War, 2 world wars, and the Great Depression. What no one could have predicted was that this unremarkable young trader would one day become the instrument of its destruction. The early years were a masterclass in survival. Fuld watched, learned, and slowly climbed the ladder, while others burned out or were pushed aside. He wasn't the smartest man on the trading floor, nor the most charismatic, but he possessed something far more valuable in the world of high finance: an absolute unwillingness to lose. Colleagues remember a man who arrived first and left last, who studied every angle of every deal, who never forgot a slight and always remembered who owed him favors. By the 1980s, he'd become a key player in Lehman's bond trading operations, making millions for the firm and building a reputation as someone who played to win. Ethics be damned. But the real education came in 1984, when Lehman Brothers was sold to American Express after a brutal internal power struggle. Fuld learned a critical lesson. In the business of money and greed, loyalty meant nothing, and survival meant everything. When American Express spun off Lehman Brothers in 1994, making it an independent public company once again, Richard Fuld seized his moment. He became CEO, taking control of a 150-year-old institution with a culture of conservative banking and transforming it into something unrecognizable. This was no longer a bank. It was becoming a casino, a leveraged speculation machine dressed in the respectable clothing of Wall Street tradition. Fuld's strategy was brutally simple: use massive amounts of borrowed money to make enormous bets on real estate, mortgage-backed securities, and complex financial derivatives that few people truly understood. The leverage ratio, how much money Lehman borrowed for every dollar it actually owned, climbed from 15-to-1 to 20-to-1, then higher still. In the secretive world of investment banking, this was the equivalent of playing poker with your children's college fund, your retirement savings, and money you'd borrowed from the mob. But the profits were intoxicating. Under Fuld's iron grip, Lehman Brothers became a corporate scandal waiting to happen, a temple dedicated to the worship of quarterly earnings at any cost. The culture he cultivated was one of absolute fear. Employees who questioned his decisions were fired. Risk managers who raised concerns were sidelined. Executives who suggested caution were shown the door. Those who remained learned to tell Fuld exactly what he wanted to hear, creating a dangerous echo chamber where reality itself was negotiable. Former employees described meetings where Fuld would sit in silence, his cold stare pinning subordinates like insects to a board, waiting for someone to show weakness. One executive later recalled, "You didn't bring Dick problems, you brought him solutions. If you couldn't do that, you were worthless to him." This was the gorilla's domain, and in his jungle, survival meant never questioning the alpha. Meanwhile, Fuld was getting spectacularly rich. Between 2000 and 2008, he personally took home over $500 million in compensation, building a collection of mansions, private jets, and all the trappings of untouchable wealth. But here's where the dark business story takes its first terrifying turn. Behind the scenes, something sinister was happening, something that would later be investigated by Congress, dissected by prosecutors, and analyzed by forensic accountants trying to understand how a 150-year-old institution could vanish in a single weekend. Lehman Brothers had discovered an accounting trick so devious, so perfectly designed to deceive investors, that it would become synonymous with corporate fraud. They called it Repo 105. In the shadowy world of high finance, a repurchase agreement, or repo, is essentially a short-term loan where you sell assets with a promise to buy them back. Normally, these are treated as loans on your balance sheet. But Lehman's financial wizards found a loophole. If you sold assets worth $105 for every $100 you borrowed, you could technically classify it as a sale rather than a loan. This meant billions of dollars in debt could simply disappear from Lehman's balance sheet at the end of each quarter, making the bank appear far healthier than it actually was. Between 2007 and 2008, Lehman used Repo 105 to temporarily move $50 billion off its books before every quarterly report. $50 billion of hidden debt concealed from investors, regulators, and the public. And Richard Fuld, the man at the top, later claimed he knew nothing about it. By 2007, the real estate market that Lehman had bet everything on was beginning to crack. Subprime mortgages, loans given to people who could never afford to repay them, were defaulting at alarming rates. The complex financial instruments built on these toxic mortgages were collapsing in value, and Lehman Brothers was holding more of this poisonous debt than almost any other bank on Wall Street. But instead of pulling back, instead of reducing risk, Fuld doubled down. He authorized the purchase of even more mortgage-backed securities, convinced that the market would recover and that Lehman would emerge stronger than ever. This wasn't confidence. This was delusion on a scale that defied rational explanation. Inside the firm, executives began to panic. The head of Lehman's fixed income division warned that the bank was facing catastrophic losses. Risk managers prepared presentations showing that Lehman's exposure to commercial real estate alone could wipe out the entire firm. Fuld's response was to fire the messengers and continue pretending everything was fine. In the Billionaire Secrets playbook, this is the moment when hubris transforms into something far more dangerous: willful blindness. The stock market secrets that Wall Street depends on, confidence, perception, the carefully maintained illusion of stability, were beginning to unravel. In March 2008, Bear Stearns, another major investment bank, collapsed and was sold to J.P. Morgan Chase for pennies on the dollar in a government-orchestrated rescue. The message was clear. The financial crisis was no longer theoretical. It was here, and Lehman Brothers was next in line. Fuld went into damage control mode, publicly insisting that Lehman was strong, that its assets were solid, that fears of collapse were overblown. Behind closed doors, he was desperately searching for a buyer, for fresh capital, for anyone who might save his empire from the abyss. He tried to sell the firm to Korea Development Bank. The deal fell apart. He approached Bank of America. They walked away. He pleaded with Warren Buffett to inject capital. Buffett demanded terms that Fuld found humiliating and refused. With each rejection, the circle of possible saviors grew smaller, and the darkness closed in. Throughout the summer of 2008, Lehman's stock price plummeted as investors fled in terror. Hedge funds pulled their money. Trading partners demanded additional collateral. Credit rating agencies began downgrading Lehman's debt. And still, Richard Fuld refused to accept reality. In June, he fired the firm's chief financial officer and chief operating officer, replacing them with loyalists who wouldn't challenge his authority. In September, with Lehman's stock trading below $4, down from a high of $86 just 18 months earlier, Fuld continued to tell employees that the bank would survive, that they would weather the storm. But inside the C-suite, a different conversation was taking place. Lehman was burning through cash at an unsustainable rate. Its commercial real estate holdings were essentially worthless. Its mortgage-backed securities were toxic waste that no one would touch. The firm had perhaps days, maybe hours, before it ran out of money entirely. And the United States government, which had rescued Bear Stearns, was now signaling that it would not rescue Lehman. Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson and Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke decided to draw a line. No more bailouts. Let the market decide. Richard Fuld had built his empire on borrowed money and borrowed time. And now the bill was coming due. The final weekend was a scene of controlled chaos that would be remembered as one of the darkest moments in financial history. On Friday, September 12, 2008, the titans of Wall Street gathered at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York for emergency meetings. Bank of America and Barclays were the last potential buyers. Fuld waited by the phone in Lehman's headquarters, still believing a rescue would materialize. But the calls brought only bad news. Bank of America chose to purchase Merrill Lynch instead. Barclays faced regulatory hurdles from the British government and couldn't complete a deal without guarantees that the U.S. government refused to provide. By Sunday afternoon, September 14th, it was over. Lehman Brothers would file for bankruptcy protection at midnight, making it the largest corporate collapse in American history, with over $600 billion in assets and debts. 26,000 employees would lose their jobs. Investors would see their holdings evaporate, and the global financial system would seize up like an engine that had run out of oil, triggering a worldwide recession that destroyed $8 trillion in wealth and threw millions of people out of work. But here's the second devastating revelation that transforms this corporate scandal into something even more sinister. In the weeks and months following Lehman's collapse, investigators discovered something that would haunt Richard Fuld for the rest of his life. Internal emails revealed that senior executives had been cashing out their stock holdings and selling their Lehman shares even as they publicly proclaimed the firm's strength. Fuld himself had sold millions of dollars in stock during the years leading up to the collapse, converting his Lehman shares into cash while encouraging employees and investors to hold on. The Bankruptcy Examiner's Report, a 2,200-page document that read like a thriller novel about wealth and power, detailed how Lehman's leadership had systematically misled investors about the firm's financial condition. The Repo 105 scheme alone had hidden tens of billions in leverage. Lehman had valued its commercial real estate holdings at prices far above their actual worth, inflating the balance sheet to maintain the illusion of solvency. Executives had received enormous bonuses right up until the final weeks, even as the firm spiraled toward oblivion. This wasn't just business failure. This was a financial mystery wrapped in layers of deception, self-dealing, and a level of arrogance that bordered on sociopathic. and at the center of it all stood Richard Fuld, the gorilla who had ruled his jungle with an iron fist, now facing the ruins of everything he'd built. The aftermath was a business crime scene of epic proportions. Congressional hearings were convened, with Fuld dragged before the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform in October 2008. Representative Henry Waxman confronted him with the brutal facts. While Lehman Brothers was collapsing, while employees were losing their retirement savings, Fuld had personally earned nearly $500 million over 8 years. Fuld sat stone-faced, insisting he had done nothing wrong, that he had worked tirelessly to save the firm, that he too was a victim of market forces beyond anyone's control. He claimed that his actual compensation was closer to $300 million after taxes and losses on his Lehman stock, as if losing $200 million somehow made him sympathetic. The American public, watching their 401ks evaporate and their homes enter foreclosure, was not impressed. Fuld became the face of Wall Street greed, a symbol of everything wrong with a financial system that privatized profits and socialized losses. Death threats poured in. Security guards were posted at his estate. In one infamous incident in October 2008, a Lehman employee allegedly punched Fuld in the face at the firm's gym, knocking him unconscious. Whether the story was true or apocryphal, it captured the rage that millions felt toward the man who had helped destroy the global economy. The legal pursuit that followed revealed the dark underbelly of entrepreneurship secrets in modern finance. That those who cause the most damage are often the least likely to face consequences. Civil lawsuits were filed by investors, employees, and pension funds seeking to recover their losses. Some were settled for pennies on the dollar. Criminal investigations were launched by federal prosecutors looking for evidence of fraud. But proving criminal intent in the labyrinthine world of high finance is notoriously difficult. Fuld hired the best defense attorneys money could buy and maintained that he had acted in good faith, relying on advice from lawyers and accountants who had assured him that Repo 105 and other accounting practices were legal. The bankruptcy examiner concluded that Fuld had been at least grossly negligent in his oversight of the firm, and that he may have breached his fiduciary duties to shareholders. But grossly negligent is not the same as criminal. In 2013, after years of investigation, the Department of Justice announced that it would not bring criminal charges against Fuld or other Lehman executives, citing insufficient evidence to prove they had knowingly violated the law. This decision sparked outrage among victims of the financial crisis, who watched the architect of the largest bankruptcy in American history walk away without spending a single day in prison. The psychological insights into Richard Fuld's psyche reveal a man trapped between self-delusion and painful awareness. In rare interviews after the collapse, he has alternated between defiance and self-pity, insisting that Lehman Brothers was murdered by short sellers and government officials who refused to provide the same assistance given to other banks. He has claimed that if regulators had guaranteed Lehman's trading positions for just 1 week, he could have found a buyer and saved the firm. His voice carries the bitter tone of a man who believes history has treated him unfairly, that he was a scapegoat for systemic failures far beyond his control. And perhaps there is a grain of truth in this. Lehman Brothers did not create the housing bubble, the subprime mortgage market, or the regulatory failures that allowed banks to become too big to fail. But Fuld's tragedy is that he was not just a participant in this system. He was one of its most enthusiastic architects. He built a culture that rewarded recklessness, that punished caution, that confused leverage with genius and luck with skill. The hidden cost of success for Richard Fuld was the complete inability to see the difference between taking smart risks and playing Russian roulette with other people's money. Today, Richard Fuld lives in quiet obscurity, a ghost haunting the margins of the business world he once dominated. He founded a small financial advisory firm called Matrix Private Capital Group, offering advice to clients on mergers and acquisitions. He has given occasional speeches at business schools and conferences, always insisting that he was treated unfairly, that the government should have rescued Lehman the way it rescued AIG, just one day after Lehman's collapse. He remains wealthy, having kept most of his fortune through careful asset protection strategies, living in a $10 million mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut. But the empire is gone. The legacy is tarnished beyond repair, and the name Richard Fuld will forever be synonymous with the greatest financial disaster of the modern era. The broader lessons from this business scandal documentary extend far beyond one man's rise and fall. Lehman's collapse exposed the danger of unchecked ambition in an industry where profits are measured in billions, but losses are measured in human suffering. It revealed how corporate cultures built on fear and intimidation destroy the internal checks that might prevent catastrophic mistakes. It demonstrated that leverage, borrowing massive amounts of money to amplify returns, is a double-edged sword that can transform small mistakes into civilization-threatening disasters. The story of Richard Fuld also illuminates the psychological mechanisms that allow intelligent people to drive themselves and their institutions off a cliff. Confirmation bias, the tendency to seek information that confirms existing beliefs while ignoring contradictory evidence, turned Lehman's executive suite into an echo chamber where bad news was unwelcome. Sunk cost fallacy, the inability to abandon failing strategies because of past investments, kept Fuld doubling down on real estate bets long after they had turned toxic. And hubris, the ancient Greek concept of excessive pride that leads to downfall, infected every level of the organization. When you're the gorilla, when everyone fears you, when you've made billions of dollars by being right more often than wrong, it becomes psychologically impossible to admit that this time you might be catastrophically wrong. This is the seductive danger of success in the world of money and greed. It creates a feedback loop where victory breeds confidence, confidence breeds risk-taking, risk-taking breeds more victory, until the inevitable moment when the risks prove too great and the entire structure collapses. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of this real-life business story is how little has fundamentally changed in the financial system since Lehman's collapse. Yes, there are new regulations, Dodd-Frank, stress tests, capital requirements designed to prevent another catastrophic failure. But the basic incentive structure remains intact. Executives still receive enormous bonuses for short-term profits, while bearing minimal personal risk if their bets go bad. Banks are larger now than they were in 2008, more interconnected, potentially more dangerous if they fail. The too-big-to-fail problem has only gotten worse, creating a moral hazard where financial institutions know they can take extraordinary risks because taxpayers will ultimately bail them out. And in the shadows, new Richard Fulds are rising, building their own empires on leverage and borrowed confidence, convinced that they are smarter than the market, that the rules don't apply to them, that their luck will never run out. History suggests they are wrong, but by the time they discover this truth, it will be too late for everyone else caught in the blast radius. The human cost of Lehman's collapse extends far beyond balance sheets and stock prices. 26,000 employees lost their jobs overnight, many of them mid-level workers who had nothing to do with the firm's risk-taking, but whose retirement accounts were stuffed with Lehman stock that became worthless. Pension funds that had invested in Lehman Brothers saw billions of dollars evaporate, forcing cuts to retiree benefits and municipal services. The collapse triggered a global credit freeze that destroyed $8 trillion in wealth, led to millions of foreclosures, and pushed unemployment rates to levels not seen since the Great Depression. Small businesses couldn't get loans. Families lost their homes, Young people graduated into the worst job market in generations. And while Richard Fuld testified before Congress and fought lawsuits from his Greenwich mansion, millions of ordinary people suffered consequences he would never personally experience. This is the ultimate lesson in power dynamics and money, that those who create systemic risks rarely bear the full cost when those risks materialize. In the end, Richard Fuld's legacy serves as a dark parable about the limits of individual ambition in systems designed to amplify both success and failure. He was not uniquely evil or even uniquely incompetent. He was a product of a culture that confused ruthlessness with leadership, that mistook leverage for innovation, that believed markets could regulate themselves without oversight or accountability. His tragedy was believing his own mythology, that he was the gorilla, invincible and unchallengeable, capable of bending reality to his will through sheer force of personality. But reality, as Lehman Brothers discovered on September 15, 2008, does not negotiate. It does not care about your confidence, your past victories, or how much money you've made. It simply is. And when you build an empire on borrowed money, hidden debts, and the carefully maintained illusion of strength, reality eventually sends you a bill that cannot be paid with accounting tricks or executive compensation. The shadow of Lehman Brothers still looms over the financial world, a reminder that in the business of wealth and power, the distance between triumph and catastrophe can be measured in hours. Richard Fuld stands as a monument to the danger of unchecked power, of corporate cultures that confuse fear with respect, of leaders who surround themselves with yes-men and shoot the messengers who bring bad news. His story is a warning written in the wreckage of a 150-year-old institution and the lives of millions affected by its collapse. But it is also a question that haunts us still. How many other Richard Fulds are out there right now, sitting in corner offices, making the same mistakes, building the same fragile empires, convinced that they are different, that they are smarter, that the rules don't apply to them, and more terrifying still, when their empires collapse, as history suggests they inevitably will, who will pay the price? The evidence suggests it won't be them. It will be you and me and every ordinary person unlucky enough to be standing nearby when the next financial weapon detonates. Because that's the true secret behind billionaire secrets and corporate scandal. The game is rigged, the risks are socialized, and the gorillas always find a way to survive, while their jungle burns around them. 15 years later, on quiet September mornings, if you know where to look in Greenwich, Connecticut, you can sometimes see an elderly man walking alone, his face hardened by years of legal battles and public scorn, his fortune intact, but his legacy in ruins. He still believes he was right. He still thinks Lehman could have been saved. And somewhere in the back of his mind, in the place where successful men keep their darkest thoughts, Richard Fuld must wonder if he had just sold to Barclays on different terms, if the government had just guaranteed one more weekend, if he had just listened to those risk managers he fired, would history remember him as a hero instead of a villain? But history doesn't trade in hypotheticals. It only records what happened. And what happened was that the gorilla of Wall Street, the man who couldn't lose, the architect of one of the great financial empires of the modern age, pushed all his chips to the center of the table and lost everything. The house always wins. And when you're playing with other people's money, the house is reality itself, cold, unforgiving, and utterly indifferent to how powerful you thought you were. Subscribe and listen to our next story below.